So I was MP 2015 to 17 and then 2019 to 24 when I was maybe 7 or 8 and she could no longer get up to take us to school in the morning. And unbeknown to me, of course, she'd have been drinking quite heavily.
You mentioned your mum a few times there.
Yeah.
I wanted to jump into that if I may.
I'm so pleased it comes across as positive because I hated her. I couldn't bear her to touch me. I really, absolutely. And it was only when we reconciled right at the very end.
You've lost your job.
I know.
You've been made redundant.
I think I can honestly say I had no expectation of winning. And I don't want to get political, but as I was obviously a Conservative, and we tore ourselves apart.
Hello and welcome to Leaders in Disguise. My name's Gary Parsons and I'm your host. On this episode we had the honour of speaking with the amazing Amanda Solloway, former MP for Derby North. She opened up about her own personal mental health journey, losing her parliamentary seat in 2024 and the advocacy work that she does in mental health. Her story, shaped by her mother's mental health illness and suicide, has fueled her passion for breaking the mental health stigma, especially in leadership. In this episode, we dive into the work that she also does with the charity that she set up called Head High CIC and her plans for the future. On this podcast, we only have one rule, and that's to be kind to our guests. As Amanda bravely shares her vulnerable story, breaking the stigma around mental health is something that all of us still need to be working on. Please remember to be kind to all of our guests. If you haven't already signed up to our Patreon, it's a place where you can also join in and talk about the episodes in the community with other people that are big supporters and have been doing some amazing work for us. Thank you very much to all of our Patreon supporters. You can either download the app on your smartphone and type in Leaders in Disguise, or simply go to patreon.com/Leaders Disguise. Let's jump into this episode. Amanda, welcome to Leaders in Disguise. Thank you so much for coming along. It's lovely to see you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Gary. You know, I always love seeing you and being here today. Just so excited.
How are you doing? How are you feeling?
Yeah, good. Obviously, I've had a busy few weeks, a life-changing experience in terms of being an MP and then no longer. But yeah, really, positive about the future.
I know you're up to a lot at the moment. We'll get into that
Okay.
at some point, I'm sure. So we need to address it. And
yeah.
We're talking about leaders in disguise. It's all about the mental health and well-being of leaders. I see you as a community leader. I appreciate you aren't party leader, but ultimately you're a leader within a community. People look up to you, so it's really important that we talk about that. Before we get into that, though, one of the things that I don't think people will know. Well, first of all, like I say, we'll get into it. You were the Derby North MP.
Yes.
So we'll absolutely get into that. One of the things that probably people don't know about you is you had a long career within HR and people and development, didn't you?
Yes.
Before politics even started. So should we jump into that? Should we get stuck into that a little bit more? Then obviously we'll start addressing politics and mental health and because I know you're huge in the world of mental health.
Yeah.
So tell me where did Amanda's career start then?
What
got you into HR?
Gosh, well, I started when I was 16 or 17 working in an off license. So, and I say that because retail, I just always love retail. And even then, I remember I was a Saturday student, didn't do very well at my A-levels. We can come into that in a bit if you like, because I didn't really attend school. I was probably drinking a little bit too much, had quite a chaotic life. But one of the things I've always had is a really hard-driven work ethic. I'm not saying it's good to have that, but it is something that I've always had. And so when I left the off license, I remember them saying to me, Amanda, if you work as hard anywhere as you have here, you will always do well. So I've always held that a little bit, Gary, thinking hard work does pay off. But then I did my A-levels, didn't do very well in my A-levels. However, I had an assessment to join the Sainsbury's management scheme. So that's how I got into Sainsbury's. There was either the sort of internal, there was also A-level entrance or degree entrance. So I was an A-level entrant. Spent a lot of time at Sainsbury's, and still to this day in my cupboards have my baked beans all facing to the front, all in order. But anyway,
I'm glad you do.
That's
yeah, I'm like that anyway. I thought that was a Gary thing.
No, it was probably a sad thing. But anyway, I can't help myself. But while I was, when I was pregnant with my first daughter, I was working about 60, 70 hours, and it was really, really quite difficult. And I went back when she was 4 months old, which is quite a lot going back. So with my second daughter, I went back when she was 2 months old. However, I was able to go back 3 days a week. And what they did, instead of being from a management point of view, they allowed me to go into the training and development side. So it's a store instructor, slightly different role. But when I needed to go back full time, I think it was probably a year secondment, they said I had to go back into the management side. So I started looking around, see if there are any jobs that were available in training development, because I loved it. I loved people, loved all that development, and started looking around. And funnily enough, I went for a job and turned it on the wrong day for the wrong job, which is just absolutely difficult.
Did you get it?
Well, this is what I was going to say. But they remembered me so much, and this was with Help the Aged, that the lady who interviewed me remembered me so much that she called me back when a regional training role came up and said, look, I really do think you should be applying for this. And that set me down the whole different route. So I went to Help the Aged doing training development. Unfortunately, after a few years, was made redundant. Then I worked very small time, Save the Children in as an area manager. Liked it, loved working for Save the Children, but really liked that development role. So looked for another job, and then went to work for a massive manufacturing company called William Baird, which lots of people will know.
Big clothing
clothing group, did clothes for children's clothes for Marks and Spencer, did men's suits, did Planet. This is an old jacket that I've had 20 years from Planet, actually. And then but I worked for the men's side. Then with that, so I was the head of training. The great thing I did was able to look at all the training development that was available, think about emotional intelligence, NLP, coaching, etc., put myself on all those courses, and then disseminated it out to throughout the group, which was really a large group at that time. So there's a quick whistle-stop tour as to how I got there. Within that, I then I did my MVQ to get a degree equivalent, and then became a fellow member of the Institute of Personnel Development. Wow.
So it's really, and it's really, I wanted you to be able to tell that story because people will associate it with politics.
Yeah.
But you were only in politics from 2015 as an MP.
Yes.
But had you been in politics, and we'll get into it a little bit more, had you been in politics a lot longer than that then?
So I was MP 2015 to 17, and then 2019 to 24. I have always been interested in politics. I remember my father being incredibly interested. I remember Ken Clarke back in the day, sort of years and years ago. And I even found a letter the other day, from a 40-years-old letter, when Andrew Mitchell was the MP for Gedling, thanking me for my help supporting him delivering leaflets. So I've always had a really interest in politics. And I would actively encourage people to have an interest in politics. I think whatever your party persuasion, and a lot of my friends are socialist actually, but whatever your persuasion, I just think it's really good to have an interest in politics. So just had a massive interest. Never, though, and maybe we'll come on to this, I never believed that I could become an MP. You have that, it's that imposter syndrome, it's everything. Just never believed that I could do it. So it's like, oh my goodness, I did it. I became a minister as well, which is
You did, incredible. And we'll get into that. Yeah. And congratulations.
Thank you.
Twice. I know. You got into, you won twice. It's we'll get into that. I was going to ask you though, and we'll go into family, because it sounds, just from what you've described, you've talked about family quite a lot there. But before we do, it sounds like you've really developed this style. Would you say that your experience through Sainsbury's and Help the Aged created this leadership style that for you? Well,
so when I worked at Sainsbury's, it was actually quite difficult for women in management. It was a long time ago. And I've already said, 60 hours a week is a lot of hours. And probably often would have been more than that, with an expectation, and a wrong expectation, that the more hours you do, the better manager you are. And it's something probably still exists today, but I feel very strongly that actually it's all about utilising people properly. It's all about developing them, making people feel valued. And when I actually came to finally leave Sainsbury's, I can honestly say that I was absolutely exhausted. I've been exhausted from all the hours, exhausted from the demands of the role. And it's not that I wasn't capable of doing it, but I just felt really, really strongly that I didn't feel valued, and was I given the support from other managers. And so that gave me the opportunity to, and it's changed a lot, by the way, but I'm going back to the 80s. It's a very different management style, very different world. And it was really hard and really brutal. And I actually came out of that really bruised. And I just felt, and I feel really strongly, that nobody should ever have felt the way I felt when I left Sainsbury's at that time. And that's not indicative of how it is today. It's just a reflection on how it was back then.
I was going to say what the world was like at that
point.
What
the world was like, absolutely.
Do you regret working in that role and doing what you did?
Not at all. I think working retail is a fantastically exciting environment, and then going on to work in a manufacturing environment is really exciting. So I don't regret it at all. I sometimes judge my life by the music I remember, and I remember growing up music that my mum used to play for me, and we'd probably go into that. I remember as a teenager getting into Northern Soul, then getting into punk. When I look back and think about when my daughters were growing up, I can't remember the music. And that's almost like indicates to me I was just so lost in being a mother, which I adored, working, trying to keep food on the plate, all of that. My husband was made redundant quite a few times during that time as well. So it's just really, really difficult. And it just, that treadmill. And I would just like to really, I hope, give people the confidence to live in the moment and enjoy the moment. And I just feel really passionately about that.
You mentioned your mum a few times there. I wanted to jump into that, if I may. I know you've been fairly public, very open about what happened in your own experience of mental health, particularly your mum's mental health. You obviously, I say obviously for me, not many people listening or watching will know you're a huge advocate of mental health for the work that you've done, whether that's in office or in your own life. And we'll get into talk about the charity that you set up many years ago now. Do you want to, just for the benefit of everybody else, just explain the challenges that your mum was experiencing and how that's influenced how you advocate for mental health?
So there are two significant mental health to people who I always think about when I talk about mental health. One is my cousin, who was 36 when he sadly took his life, and it was absolutely, utterly devastating. And I can talk about that and how devastating that was to us as a family, as I know it is to anybody who loses anybody to suicide. In terms of my mum, again, I was able to experience what it was like to live in a family with somebody who was really suffering from mental health issues. And of course, nowadays it's so fantastic because we talk a lot more, which is one of the really important things. But also we have far more things that are helpful, and we have better diagnosis. So when I look back, and I think about this a lot because I want to do justice to my mum, who my relationship broke down with her tremendously, and it was only really at the end that we really reconciled. And I think had it been in today's society, we'd have had a far better, richer relationship, which is such a shame. However, one thing I will say is I hope that I never got in the way of a relationship with my daughters and my mum. And actually they always talk incredibly fondly of my mum, who was an amazing, amazing spirit, which hopefully we can come on to. But in terms of, my nan suffered with agoraphobia and claustrophobia. My mum tried to take her life at 17. And there's always a question there, nature and nurture. There's so much to talk about. I don't know how long we've got.
Maybe we'll do a part two at some point.
We so should, because my mum was vibrant and gorgeous and a brilliant artist and so full of vitality and life. And there's so much we would have done for somebody like that in this day and age. But times were very, very different. Wouldn't have spoken about it. She was sent to a school where she boarded with the head teacher. That would not have been good for her because she was isolated when she came home at the weekends because she had no friends. She was isolated at school because she was living with the head teacher. And so she very much went into her own world. And I remember her absolute passion and love of words, and words are really important, and her love of music and her love of art. And even to this day, and I do this with my granddaughter, she used to pick me up from school, and we'd drive along, and she'd go, when we finish, she'd go, here we are for where you want, change here for where you're going, all is for here, get off. And then she'd do things like tongue twisters, like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled pepper, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled pepper, where's a piece of pickled pepper Peter Piper picked? Now, as you can tell, I can do it very fluently.
I noticed that was
and
very
I
accurate.
can do quotes from Shakespeare, Alice in Wonderland. She just had that richness. There was so many joy, but it was all darkened by the fact that she was so poorly. It was really difficult. And I remember when I was maybe 7 or 8, and she could no longer get up to take us to school in the morning. And I remember going in, having my hair plaited because my hair was very long and dark, and she'd almost be back asleep, by the time she finished the end of my plait. And unbeknown to me, of course, she'd have been drinking quite heavily. And when I talked to my dad, and again, very different time, and it's very easy to sit in judgment of how people act. But my dad was stoic. He stood by her. And sometimes I wonder, why did you give in to her? Why were you always there to support her? When she would be saying, if you don't do this, I'm going to kill myself. If you don't do this, I'm going to take my life. And yet, I thought he was weak, but he wasn't. He was strong.
Yeah.
He stood by her. He loved her. He's 90 this year, by the way.
I know we've spoken off microphone how fondly and how passionate you are about looking after him now.
Yeah, absolutely. But we just didn't talk. And when I think about the amount of alcohol that she would drink, so she would have at least a couple of bottles of Shinsano, as it was then. And we had my dad was so embarrassed that he had a mountain in the garden that he put the bottles in, and then we covered it. So when he left, if one day somebody would dig up all of these bottles. Another thing is when she went in and out of rehabilitation, she learnt different ways to get high. And one of them was a G's Linctus, which is now banned. It was a cough mixture. And if you had one of these bottles, it was equivalent to, you get a real high, especially if you're having the alcohol as well. And my dad, I had no money because it was all lots of complicated reasons, but didn't have the money. And I remember him walking into Beeston from where we lived. His shoes were threadbare, but he'd have to go to different pharmacists because they would only sell one bottle. But my mother needed maybe 2 or 3 to add to the alcohol that she was consuming. So really, when I think about her addiction to benzodiazepines, they were very strong and really, really powerful and mind-changing as well. So, yeah, I mean, there's lots I can tell about going to see her.
You speak so fondly of her, whilst also, I'm sure you've talked about, because you're so open with it, you're so honest, and it's great that you are able to tell those stories, and I can see how lovely you recall those memories, but I imagine it was quite challenging. How has that influenced the advocacy work that you do? And I know you've done a lot within mental health.
So I guess I'm so pleased it comes across as positive, because I hated her. I couldn't bear her to touch me. I really, absolutely. And it was only when we reconciled right at the very end, and I've said this publicly, that we were able to, I just couldn't bear her. It was very, very complicated. However, now that I look back, and I'm so pleased it comes across fondly, because we're able to talk so much about mental health issues. Because now, when I think about how I would have been at 15, I would have been horrible. Hormones kicking in. I had this mum who was suffering from depression, had a breakdown, etc. But I didn't, as a teenager, know how to do that. There was no help. And so this is why it's so important to me that we talk about mental health. In the workplace, it's important we talk about it, because that's where we can often recognise things, but also just from a family point of view. And if we see, as a family, we would have all been suffering. There would have been signs that people could have seen. But of course, nobody would have spoken about it then. And then had we, in this day and age, I think, transport ourselves to now, how different would it have been? My mum may well have still been here. She's been dead for many years now. I would have had the pleasure of knowing this woman. And this is my plea, Gary, is I wish, it's so sad I didn't know her. But I know she was amazing. And I just don't want anybody to have to get to 63 like I am now and wish they'd got to know that brilliant, brilliant person. So that's my plea.
I think, and from my own experience of mental health that I've gone through, I always say to my family and to my friends, I know, and this is again from my own experience, is that when we experience mental health, I feel as though we are the worst people to be around. So I feel for your dad, I feel for you, for you, children particularly parents that have gone through it, because we are the worst people to be around. We don't want to be in our own company, let alone anybody else being there. And I think, fair, respect to your father, and you're absolutely right. Hormones and your experience in life and maturing.
Yeah.
But I'd also agree with you. I think now we'd have a more, I don't know, I feel really old when I say this, but I feel like kids these days get it. They understand, or are more. I was with a friend last night for dinner and she was saying to her children, let me explain to you why that isn't right and why this is okay. Because actually I want you to understand that how people treat each other is really important, and how we understand how each other are. And one of them is going to therapy. So she openly talks about going to therapy. And she was talking about how she interacts with texture, and she doesn't like hugs, but I got a hug when I walked through the door, and I was really happy and privileged to be able to do that. And I do absolutely agree with you. I feel like we can have that conversation more now.
Yeah.
But I still feel for the people that have to be in and around when we are experiencing mental health.
Well, it's complex, and we should do a whole series on this. Well, you are doing a whole series, but it's far too complex to talk about in such a short period of time. And I think it's great that you do acknowledge that sometimes when you are in that, and I guess, when I see people who are particularly going through different stages from a mental health point of view, it can feel quite selfish as well. And I understand that. I think with my mum, she had a lot of emotional intelligence. And sometimes I think when I think about emotional intelligence, and you'll know what that is, it's self-awareness, it's self-management, it's social awareness, relationship management. And sometimes that can go, actually, when you're in a dark place. And, when I talk to people, depression, and there is obviously, there's anxiety, there's different forms of depression. The feeling of nothing is one of the worst places to be. Yeah. And when there is that nothing, that is such a dark place. And I have seen people in that dark place, obviously, with my cousin and my mum and many other people as well. But what my mum was able to do, which I think is probably what's made myself and my brother and sister resilient, is she knew sometimes she had really lucid moments, and in those lucid moments she was always so passionate about her children. She fought for us tooth and nail. And I remember my nan was absolutely petrified of thunder and lightning, absolutely petrified, so much so that we used to have to go round and close our curtains, even go back before she died. And she used to hide my mum under the stairs. Now, the brilliant thing my mum did was, and she was petrified, therefore, of thunder and lightning, but my mum would sit and watch the thunder and lightning, going goosebumpy, and tell us how beautiful and special it was. Oh, wow. That is special. Yeah. And that is, I think, what I wouldn't have known. I would have known that as a child. I knew it as an adult. I forgot about it as a teenager. And the more we can help teenagers to really understand what it's like, or not even teenagers, but young people, and that's why talking is so important. We're digressing. I'm sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. Yeah. It's absolutely fine. Yeah. I'm just looking at my notes. I feel like we need to jump into politics.
Oh, my goodness.
We spent 20 or so minutes on looking, or whatever time it will be on here, talking about that. And it's really important. And thank you for going through that, because I feel as though people need to know you. Right. I know you when we sat down, crikey, 8 years ago when we sat down, and you were certainly doing a lot around mental health. And I learned about that, and I found this new respect for you, because I appreciated the impact it had on you, cousin, your mum, your own, mental health because of that, I'm sure. And it's great to be able to see you work your way through politics and become a minister as well as an MP. of course, maybe we'll start with the obvious. So 2024. So let's get this clear. So 2015,
Yes.
2017, you
Yes.
finished in office there.
Yes.
You didn't feel as it was over, but you certainly battled and got back in. You were one of the people that this year, and I'm going to avoid party politics if we may, because we'll lose half the listeners, I'm sure, when we get into it. But I'll mention it because it's significant. We saw a government change, 15-year dramatic government change, a huge landslide. I don't sit within your constituency, which I think is maybe important to say. My local constituency, seen as a safe seat for a Conservative government, changed. I was shocked about that. I don't follow politics too much, but I saw that and was shocked. Sadly, you lost your seat in Derby North. How did that feel?
Well, for me, I, as you say, lost in 2017. And so I'd done it before. It doesn't make it easier, but you know. Also, where I am, Derby North was a bellwether seat, so inevitably it can swing. And I'm also a realist, and I think I can honestly say I had no expectation of winning. And I don't want to get political, but as I was obviously a Conservative, and we tore ourselves apart. Yeah. And I didn't feel at any point, I certainly didn't believe that I was going to win in 2024. That's not to say I'm not mourning the loss of what is the best job in the world. Yeah. And I would encourage anybody who's interested in politics, whatever political persuasion, to do this amazing job, because it's interesting, it's fascinating, but you can help people. Yeah. And that's what I loved so much about it. Even going into a school and inspiring somebody to do something that they want to do, going into a workplace and thanking people, seeing our brilliant NHS. There are so many things that you could do. So it's just the best job in the world. And that's what I of course I am mourning that, but I'm realistic enough to think I'd love to do it again. Oh my goodness, third time lucky. Let's hopefully get a safer seat this time. But also realistic enough to think I need to earn money. I have to get on with it, and I'm dusting myself down and moving on. Many of my colleagues are going through different parts of the cycle. There's a mourning part of it. There's a denial part as well. All those things that we see typically, I'm
putting my business hat on now, and I'm thinking of the change curve of
exactly.
that anger, that upset, that acceptance, of the denial, not necessarily in that order.
Yeah.
I want to just say one thing out loud. I looked at the stats and checked. So salary for an MP is just short of 90,000, I think, on there. That's a big change to suddenly see as an MP, and I don't think I was going to post about it on social media at the time. I mentioned this to you because I dropped you a note to say sorry to see it's happened. Hope you're okay. And that was very conscious of me because I know you on a personal level. I wanted to reach out to you and say, you've lost your job.
I know.
You've been made redundant. Whatever it's like there. And I know that I don't know this, but I feel as though if people voted you for you as an individual, maybe you would have been still in power, and you've been affected considerably by those Westminster party politics that we're trying to avoid. That must have been a huge shock, and I don't think many people realise, do they, that Amanda earns a salary here and loses that money. We've got a mortgage to pay as well as I have to pay, unless you paid yours off.
No, far from it. And it is brutal. It was incredibly brutal in 2017 because there was less support. This time there's been a lot more support across party as well. So it's been a lot more helpful. But the reality is I need to get out. I need to find a job. I do have a mortgage that I need to pay. And so, yes, absolutely. And I'm not the only one in that position. There are a lot of us. And redundancy is always difficult. I was made redundant at Help the Aged, and I hung on as long as I could. And you don't mean to, because it's not personal, but you can't help but take it personally as well. You're thinking, what do I do? But anyway, here I go. I'm putting myself back out there into the HR world. So please, the kind of roles that I used to do with like these trusted advisor roles, really helping business think about strategy, executive coaching. So fingers crossed. I find the problem is, Gary, if I'm honest with you, I suppose this is maybe typical of anybody. I hate asking for business. It's
you don't need to.
Well, I do because I need the work.
It just happens.
Because it doesn't just happen, does it? That's the problem. We have to get out there. I've had to do my CV. I've done my functional CV. You've got 2 CVs now. I've got my LinkedIn profile, and now I need to start approaching people and saying, please, would you employ me, because I need to get that work-life balance. I need to be able to do my politics still, but I also need to be earning money, as you say.
Is it difficult because I was going to ask you that question. I've got no doubt that you'll run again when another election comes up. Is that right? You still very much want to be an MP again if it comes up?
I'd love to. I would really love to.
I guess the right opportunity.
It was perfect for me.
So what does somebody do in your situation where they know that in the future they may, and fingers crossed for you that you do get back into office? What does somebody do about that? You can't really go and get a permanent job because you might leave in, I guess, turnover of staff tends to be that. But then equally, you've spoken about advising, and you've built up a lot of connections. I know that you've been active meeting people like me and others and connecting people up and hopefully making some money for you along the way.
Well, I haven't as yet, but hopefully, I mean, we're early days. We're what, 8 weeks, I guess. I think definitely want to need to start earning money. Definitely need to make those connections. And the reality is that anybody goes into politics, you never know if you're going to win. And so therefore employers are often really good, that they know that if they have somebody who's politically interested, that they accept the fact that 1 minute, and this is the opposite of brutal, you're not an MP, and then you get voters as the MP on the Thursday or Friday, whenever the result is as well. So it's equally as, very
a shock.
Yeah, it's equally as a shock. And it's there. Yeah.
You obviously enjoy politics. I know you've been involved in, correct me now, was it the Human Rights Committee that you were on there, and all sorts of different committees? That must give you a real good insight into the world of politics and give you a different perspective on business.
Yes. I mean, they had different select committees. So I joined the BAE Select Committee, as it was, so the Business Enterprise Industrial Strategy Select Committee. That was fascinating. We looked at things like the British Home Stores, the pension, Philip Green, and all that. So there was some really interesting inquiries that we did. And then for the Joint Committee for Human Rights, I was the rapporteur for mental health. So I looked at self-inflicted deaths in prisons, which again was really, really quite fascinating. And then, of course, when I left and then came back, I was a Minister for Science through COVID, again, fascinating.
Yeah, of course. Yes, you were in office during that, weren't you?
Yeah, and then being the Minister for Energy and Affordability just until recently, really looking at those things like the prepayment meters, making sure that they were fair for people, and also things like standing charges. So lots and lots of things, I suppose a variety of different things. But I've been so blessed that it's always been things of interest. It's always had that social connection, which of course is so important to me.
Does it conflict you when you're sitting in a position of advising a firm? Do you have to just be careful? Because that's one of the things, and in fact I'm going to address this now, is that you're very experienced in the world of HR and business. You've got this, and it's not a sales opportunity, but I'll talk about it. So I know you're going out there and you're wanting to work with businesses to support them as a coach or as an advisor. Is there a tricky element there for you to be able to advise and support and not, I'm sure you'll be bound by lots of different codes?
No, I mean, I personally don't think so. I hope, and I hope anybody who knows me would say that I always act with integrity. And like I've said to you, my friends are cross party, not even in politics, but would have different political views. And even when I was in politics, it's a myth, we don't all hate each other, actually. We all get on really, really well. And one of the things I was renowned for was actually meeting across party. So having meetings with my counterparts in the Labour Party, Lib Dem, SNP. I think personally, what I always strive and do is think about what the best outcome for the business should be, what the best outcome for people should be. And of course, in an advisor role, what you can do from an advisory point of view is you don't have to give an absolute certainty. What you can do is say one of the things you could do is this, or you could do this. And a coaching role as well, one of the things I do when I'm coaching is really just try and get people to unravel what's going on in here, because often we have our own solutions. We just need to think about how we unravel it to get to where we want to get to.
Absolutely. I feel like I need to do a whole podcast on what coaching is, what advising is, and what mentoring is.
And counselling. There's a whole host of things, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So looking at things outside of politics then, and looking at coaching and etc., the one thing we've not talked about is your charity. What's happening with the charity?
Well, so it was not a charity; it was a CIC, so a community interest company, and we did some really good things. So had started having a free community meal with the YMCA, which still is going actually. I'm not quite sure. It's last Friday of every month, and it's still going. So what I want to do is I really want to make sure that I'm doing more things with that as well. Fundamental was a festival that we organised once a year as well. Didn't do it this year because July the 4th happened to be quite busy, but again it's something that I want to do, is just around really making this city a really fantastic place that embraces all mental health needs. And of course there's some great people that do that, some great organisations that exist, and I was really conscious that not to duplicate. I think as a city we need to be complementary in terms of our mental health offer, not duplicating. So what I think I need to do is get out, start going back, having a look at what's out there, because the landscape will have changed over the last couple of years, and then just thinking about where can Head High fit into that, and then thinking about what we need to do going forward. So absolutely determined to carry on with the work, still focused. I love young people, I just think, I mean, Gary, I say this sincerely. Children are, with the gift we have in terms of how we can educate, and I think if we get it right, the earlier we get to young people, the better. And I just know that for me, when I was growing up, my childhood might not have been the best or the easiest, but it was people around me, especially in the education system, who really got me through that. So education is just so crucial.
It's great. I mean, just jumping back to the business for a second then. So, and the charity sounds great. Yeah. I'm definitely going to keep a head high.
Yes, CIC. Head high. Hold your head high. Let's talk about mental health.
That's it. There we are.
Yeah.
Head High CIC. Yeah. Definitely going to keep an eye on that. Just thinking about the business point of view then for you as well. It's great that you are doing all of this work around mental health. And I think we're quite similar in the sense that we have the business experience, and we're also very passionate about mental health and well-being. Of course, we're sat here, we're talking about leadership and leaders of businesses. I'm going to sit on both sides of the fence when I ask this. Can we be doing more to support mental health of leaders and the well-being of leaders, politically, socially?
Well, I know is a great passion of yours.
I know my answer to it.
I think I'd like to think about this more holistically and think about the whole of the workforce. And I think one of the things I've said this to you before, and I've said this on many occasions. One of the things we talk about is when we're managing people, we always say treat others as you want to be treated yourself. Now, I disagree with that. I think what we need to do is we need to think about the person, and how that person wants to be treated and cared for is what we really need to focus on, because there are different drivers for different people. And one of the things, as an example, and I used to do a lot around stress awareness, and what I actually function really well if I'm stressed. So it's not stress to me. It's like, like some people go, I've actually said, this is brilliant. We've got to do this. We've got to do this. We've got to do this, because it's my choice. And quite often, I think when we think about stress, it's around choice. So I choose to put myself into stressful situations. It works really well for me. if somebody who doesn't like to be in a stressful situation has no choice but finds himself in a stressful situation, that is quite often where distress can occur. And of course, you have different levels of stress, with distress being one of the most extreme, and that's where obviously, you know, you can start to hit a lot of problems. So when I think about leadership, and you're saying particularly, I think we do have to be mindful, very mindful of well-being for everybody. But I think the higher up you get, not always, but often in my experience, there's a lot of high choice that's been made from the leadership. So in other words, somebody is choosing to go into that highly stressed position. They've sought that promotion. They've sought that the role that they're doing. So I think there's lots of questions to be asked around them, because it becomes a bit more complex when you think of external things that may happen, like I don't get to see my family, which of course is for me is really important. However, the question for me is not necessarily what level you're at, it's around what choice you have in what you're doing. So that's probably slightly different from the way you think about it.
I know what you're saying there, and I think absolutely right. I think certainly from a neurodiversity point of view, people handle and deal with situations in different ways. And generally, just as neurotypical people, we all interact with each other no matter what, neurotypical or not. Yeah. And I absolutely agree with you. It's stress always exists. I've said this to you personally before, and a few times on the podcast. I remember going to my doctor and saying, "Oh, I'm stressed." Oh, sorry, he asked me whether I'm stressed. Sorry, I will correct myself. He asked me whether I'm stressed, and I said, "Well, maybe a 10 out of 10 to you, but to me it's a 10 out of 20 because I've got a higher tolerance of that." I looked, I think it was like less than 12 months later, I then got diagnosed with severe depression because I was just living on this adrenaline, and there is such a thing as adrenal fatigue. And absolutely that is something that we need to be careful of. And I'm sure you have your downtime as much as your uptime, if you like. But I'm thinking more generally from a policy point of view. I told you personally, I've written to government, to new government, to say, great, it's amazing what is happening around. And I saw only this week, I don't know when this podcast will go out, but the week of recording this, that they have just turned on in England the ability to ring 111 and talk to people about mental health. And we see that statistic where they say 1 in 4 people experience mental health. But we're not talking enough, apart from this podcast, and certainly conversations are happening, we're not talking and doing enough, I feel, with mental health for leaders and business leaders. I'm not a capitalist. I don't necessarily agree with measurement of GDP in the way that we do it. But I do feel as though if we looked after our business leaders and helped those businesses not fail and thrive, then actually and mentally we could potentially be seeing a huge growth in the economy. But is there an appetite in government, do you feel, for that?
Well, definitely. That's such a complex question. We do definitely need to do a second or third or fourth discussion around that, because it is incredibly complex. And obviously, productivity is one of the most important things we can do from a business point of view. And that is definitely political. We know in this country that productivity is not as high as it should or could be. And one of the things we need to do is to increase productivity is get the most out of people. Now, there are loads of different ways that we could do that. And of course, leadership is one of the key things that we can do, which is why I think that supporting leaders is just really important. But in terms of from a mental health, and I think you're talking about from a mental health of leaders.
And well-being.
I mean, I'd love to see statistics on this, because I said, for me, it comes again back to choice, pressure. You know, there's a lot of different pressure. But I remember talking to people throughout different levels of business. And one of the things that I used to do, and I'm still passionate about, is about having a good culture where people feel safe. And I used to say, if you have the courage to talk to me about a problem that you're having, I will keep you safe within, if you feel as though you're being bullied or mistreated or everything. And nobody should feel unsafe about going to work. That is really important. But there are different pressures that apply to people in senior leadership. So it could be, as an example, an added pressure will be around if the business isn't doing as well. It's not just me I'm concerned about. It's about my 10 employees, my 100 employees, or my 1,000 employees. That's a massive burden to business leaders, a really massive burden. So that again, that could be politically. How will the budget, as an example, have an impact? There will be loads of different things that have impacts on leaders. Absolutely, it's fascinating. We should write a book.
Yeah, we should.
We should get together.
I feel like we need to unpick what necessarily those elements could be, and I agree with you. I think it's complex. I think the acknowledgement of, I appreciate not you're in government. I know you'll have influence somewhere, but certainly the government that is there, that is in power now, definitely feel as though there's bits they can be doing, and if we can have people like yourself and people that are currently sitting in Parliament to be talking about this and acknowledging that they need to support leaders, then I think we're starting. It's a long journey, isn't it?
It is a long journey, and I think that there's a lot again to be unpicked about this, and a lot for me is about people doing the right role at the right level. And sometimes that's where we're coming out of our comfort zone, really. If we may be doing something that we maybe weren't expecting to do, don't like doing, then that becomes more stressful as well. So lots of things that we could talk about.
Well, I think we've run out of time.
Oh gosh.
We could talk and talk again.
We could.
I know you had a very tight window in your very busy diary now, so I really appreciate it.
No.
Amanda, if people need to keep an eye on what you're doing and see what's going on, I'm sure your LinkedIn profiles and everything will all be getting all polished and ready to go. where do they find you? Where do they look for follow your journey?
I think the easiest thing is just to Google me. It's the way I find out about myself. Yeah, just Google Amanda Solloway, and it will bring up everything. My social media has the things I'm getting up to. My LinkedIn, as you say, has been I've just sort of got it up to date. So just give it a Google.
Amanda Solloway, find you on there.
Yes.
I'm going to go look back in some of the things you mentioned to me before, your YouTube videos.
Yes.
I saw one pop up that said YouTube rap.
So I'm going to S.
I'm going to have a look at that. I feel like we've missed out a massive opportunity.
Oh, you've got to have fun as well. And, you talk about stress as well. It's about doing things that you enjoy doing as well. I love exercise. I love having fun. Other people might find that really wearing.
Oh, absolutely. The most exercise I do is getting into the car or walking to the bus stop. So not much more than that. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll buy a bicycle now. Now I've got my camper van ready. Yeah. I'll go out and I'll do some walks and get my bicycle.
Yeah, that camper van.
Oh, you've seen that.
It is the most amazing thing.
I forgot you'd meet Vicky. You've met Vicky the van now, haven't you?
I've met Vicky the van. I've told everybody about Vicky the van. I have Vicky the van envy. She is amazing.
Bless her. I'm sure I'll tell her when I see her next on the way home. Amanda, thank you so much. I will let you get off, and let's see where we get to and the work that you do around mental health. I'm sure we'll be all keeping an eager eye on what's going on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.